In a week of news that has been dominated by stories about U.S. military leadership treating the human, legal, and material costs of war, like the mental health of the sailors and Marines aboard USS Abraham Lincoln, all as mere obstacles and collateral, there are new reasons to question how that leadership is putting civilians at risk here at home. MS Now has new reporting on what happened on a moonless night in May, just after 12 a.m., when a small medevac plane crashed into the side of a New Mexico mountain, killing 2 pilots and 2 nurses on the way to pick up a patient. The crash sparked a wildfire that burned nearly 50 square miles of forest. The plane's destination, Sierra Blanca Regional Airport, is close to the White Sands Missile Range, where the Department of Defense was actively testing a GPS jamming system, a counter-drone technology. That's according to a preliminary report from the National Transportation Safety Board. While the NTSB preliminary report does not give a definitive cause of the crash, a full investigation is still pending. It does note that about 10 minutes before the plane went down, the air traffic control supervisor contacted the military to stop jamming, which they did for about 5 minutes until the supervisor informed the military that the airplane was on a visual approach and that they could resume jamming. Josh Einiger is a senior transportation reporter with MS Now, who has been investigating this story, and he's here with me at the table now. Josh, help me understand the military's role in what happened that night.
So, Antonia, there's something called NavFest, which sounds sort of like a music festival. It happens every 2 weeks, every May for 2 weeks. There's a group of military and government and industry experts, and they come together at this White Sands missile testing range, and they test out all this technology, this GPS jamming technology that can be used in this, look, globally, electronic warfare, drone warfare is something that the United States obviously has to compete in. You've seen it in Ukraine, that the U.S. is falling behind a lot of the trends. So this is a big thing. And they test it there. So that's what we know was happening, according to the NTSB, when this plane, this air ambulance, filled, by the way, with first responders picking up a patient, were on this moonless night, relying on their instruments, which then started to act wrong because they were entering this zone where the GPS was being jammed by the military and by the folks at the White Sands facility. Important to note, they did release what's called a Notice to Airmen, a NOTAM. They didn't do this without communicating they were going to do this. But they didn't shut down the airspace. The airspace was still open. And of course, the NTSB is looking at this as at least one of the things that led to this tragedy.
This is an incredibly alarming story, just sort of the questions and implications. And I think often Americans forget that here at home, there are all these exercises.
Absolutely.
And activities that we're, frankly, very much not aware of on a day-to-day basis that have to do with warfare abroad. We think of it as far from us, but a lot of it is being tested here at home. And I wonder if you could kind of walk me through the testing of this GPS technology and some of what the consequences may be.
So a lot of it's classified, right? So we don't really know exactly what technology that they're using, but we do know that counter-drone is a big thing that is not just military. Local law enforcement is trying to get authorization to deploy some of this technology as well because there's the potential that bad actors could use a drone in a terror attack, for example. Jails, this is a big new trend. Inmates are getting contraband flown in by drones. The corrections departments are trying to deploy technology like this. And so the technology, in part, some of it anyway, involves spoofing or jamming GPS, which the drone requires to be able to figure out where it's going to go, and then be able to take over the drone. That's sort of the point of this technology. And I spoke to an expert who's an Air Force and State Department veteran who's an expert in the GPS sort of regulation space, who said this, of course, brings up some very serious issues when you talk about local agencies that might want to try to use some of this technology.
What the preliminary report and the disconnect says to me, it calls into question whether the United States government has the safest and most effective coordination procedures in place that cover the appropriate geographic territories. It also raises the question whether these testing activities are actually confined within test ranges, or are they allowed to bleed outside of those areas and impact the local populations.
And that's, of course, a huge problem, Antonia, because they're working here. They obviously have important work to do, but the airspace is not just military and it's not just civilian. And one of the things that we've seen, of course, in the last couple of years with some very high-profile disasters in the U.S. airspace is that the civil air industry and the military establishment have serious problems working together. And this seems to be a case where that has come up.
Is there any kind of robust conversation happening in this government, in this administration right now, about guardrails and safety for civilians as they try all of this new electronic warfare? Because the implication of what your expert is just saying there, right, is that until some of this is sorted out, us civilians could be potential collateral in the midst of these exercises.
Well, I mean, it has to be in the right hands, right? And I think her point, and I know that there are conversations in Washington right now about rulemaking at the federal level, really in the weeds regulation about how this type of technology can be used by maybe not civilians, but by non-military agencies across the country, right? That is an issue it is top of mind, because you don't want necessarily someone who's trained as a police officer who may not have experience in this space to perhaps use this without the proper supervision and the proper training. And that's a big issue for a lot of regulators in this space.
It just seems like another example of some of the sort of warfare technology getting ahead of the ethical and safety related constraints that the rest of our lives depend on. Josh Scheiniger, always so good to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks,
for your great
Antonia,
reporting on this important story.
Thank you.